Okay, so we've got Time Management 101, I titled this one. Okay, so I'm excited to give this message. I heard this message at my first ever Vector conference, which was actually a COC. When we had one in August. This was my very first Vector conference, my first summer. And I heard this talk, and I'm pretty sure this is like the one talk I can attribute to most of my success in college in terms of being able just to fit a lot into my schedule and actually manage it well and do well in college. So I'm excited to teach some of this stuff to you guys today, and we're going to go ahead and dive right in. So, well, we were going to dive right in. Failing to plan is planning to fail. So write that down. All right. It's unclear who said it. When I looked up the quote for this little picture, there were like lots of different people, so we won't attribute it to one person. But failing to plan is planning to fail. And so this message is really all about how to plan your time. And if you can master that one concept, I really think you can master your life and all of the different facets of it. The great thing about time is that it's really like the great equalizer. So when you think about it, every person has the same amount of time every single week, right? Everyone has 168 hours in a week. And the key to productivity is just doing more with that time and managing your time better. So it's easy to look at people who are super busy and they fit a lot in and they accomplish a lot and say, oh, well, they just have more time than I do. That's not true at all, actually. They have the exact same amount of time that you do every single week. They just manage it better. So they often say that if you want something done, you should give it to a busy person. And that's because busy people have more to fit in, so they're more productive and they're more efficient with their time out of necessity. There's also a common myth in time management, it's also still not working, that you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have your cake and eat it too. And that's a myth. That's the best thing about it, is that it's a myth. And through this message, I'm going to show you guys how you can have the entire bakery. So there's really 3 keys to effectively managing your time. And the first key, or the first step, if you haven't done so already, is to buy a planner. All right. So most of you, because you've worked with Vector for a decent amount of time at this point, you probably have a planner. And you can help me out. Thanks. You probably have a planner, but if you don't, I definitely recommend going and buying one. I just bought a new one, and you can get one, a planner on Amazon for pretty cheap. And get an academic planner so it just lasts you through the school year. And go on Amazon. I like getting one, a planner that has like a monthly snapshot, so it shows the whole monthly calendar, and then it has each week, and it has it in 15 or 30-minute time intervals. So I know some people have like the little agenda books, and they have like a day, and it just has a couple of lines, but I really find in order to manage my time effectively, I need it in 15 or 30-minute intervals, so I recommend that. And the second tip, thanks, is to use that planner. All right, so the second step is to use your planner. I know they say that like 99% of books are never opened or turned past the first few pages. I believe the same goes with planners. I think a lot of people have them and they actually never use them. So that would be the second step. And I'm going to tell you guys a little story here in terms of how to demonstrate how to manage your time and put everything in your schedule. So the story goes that one day in a college classroom, there was a professor, and he showed up to class, and before actually like teaching or doing any sort of instruction, he just sets this gigantic jar on the front table of his classroom. And he reaches under the table, and he pulls out these big rocks, all right, so rocks about this big, and he starts putting them in the jar until they get up to the top, and he asks his class, and he says, "Class, is the jar full?" And most of them responded, "No," or excuse me, "Yes, the jar is full." All right. So he pauses, reaches under the table, pulls out a bunch of little rocks, and he starts dumping them in, and he shakes the jar around, so the little rocks are starting to fill the gaps where the big rocks didn't. And he says, okay, so class, is the jar full now? And they say, yes, professor, the jar is full. To which he responds by reaching under the table, and he has a bag of sand, and he starts dumping the sand in this jar, and what does the sand do? It starts filling in the little gaps, right? It starts filling in the little spaces, and he says, class, is the jar full? Most people are like, okay, yes, of course, now the jar is full. And then he grabs some water, pours it in. The water fills up the rest of the little spaces that the sand could, and that you can't really see. And he says, okay, now the jar is full, right? And so when you manage your time, it looks like the jar, which will be like this. Oop, one more.
Ah.
Oop.
Gang, gang.
All right, and so if you manage your time, the jar will look like that. However, if you manage your time poorly and you put things in the wrong order, it looks like this, right? And so a mistake that a lot of people make is they're not great at prioritizing their rocks and their sand. And like you see in the second picture, if the sand goes in first and then the little rocks, there's no room for big rocks. So I'm going to teach you what the rocks are and all that stuff and how to put in the schedule. So first are your big rocks, okay? Big rocks are the immovable things in your schedule. So as a student, that would be classes. Even if you have an 8 a.m., you probably can't go up to your professor and be like, hey, yeah, so I don't like this time. It doesn't work for me. You got to show up to class at 8 a.m. or 9 or 12 or whenever it is. Those are not things that you can move. Club meetings. So if you are in a club or an organization, you are in a fraternity or a sorority or something of that nature, those things are usually pretty set in stone, and you can't move those. Phone jams, if you're in your office actively selling, those are set each week. Sports practices, if you go to church or a place of religion. And there might be a couple that I've missed, but anything that's big and you don't have control over time, those are your big rocks. So those need to go in the schedule first, all right? And then you've got your little rocks. And the little rocks are important, okay? So these are things that are still important. They just have a little bit of flexibility, all right? So a little rock would be studying. Very important, like probably one of the most important things you do as a student is you work on your homework and your classwork and stuff like that. But you have a little bit of flexibility. It doesn't necessarily have to be done at a specific time during the day. Things like office hours or when you can meet with a professor, those usually have a little bit of flexibility. Group meetings tend to have flexibility. If you're selling around your classes, demos, you can fit those in, any day of the week around your other things. So little rocks, they are important, but they're flexible. All right. Next, we've got sand. And these things are certainly important. However, they're not quite as high on the totem pole as like studying and getting good grades and all of that good stuff. So this is the stuff that's like exercising. Obviously, eating. You should do that every day. And it sounds silly, but planning to eat is sometimes necessary. Many of you, you've maybe had a day where you were so busy and you ate breakfast before you left the house and you get home and it's like 6, 7, whatever, and you're like, I didn't eat anything today. And so it is important sometimes to plan your food, personal growth, or other just like miscellaneous stuff that you have that you need to get done in your world, which could be a number of different things. So the sand is stuff that you want to make time for, but it's more flexible and it's not quite as important as things like studying and stuff like that. And then you've got your water, all right? As a human, we physically can't live without water. However, our schedule could live without water. So there might be times that if you can't get all this stuff in, that would be okay. But water is the stuff like Netflix, social media, naps, video games. Definitely good to like relax and take a step back from your busy day. But you certainly don't want your water to overcome all of those other rocks and that sand and stuff like that. So that is those are the categories that you want to be putting in your schedule. All right. So as far as how to make it all work, what I will say is time management. It does take practice. All right. So it's not like the first time you do this, you're going to be a master at it. It definitely does take practice and making it all work and putting it on the schedule, but here are some steps to planning, all right? The first thing is you've got to plan to plan, all right? So you've got to put time in your schedule to plan, and what I recommend doing is I recommend having this at the same time every single week. So some people like to do it on the weekends, like before the new week starts. You can do it whenever you want, but I recommend giving yourself an appointment to make your schedule. We call it a power hour. Kate was talking about like day drinking earlier. Not that type of power hour, okay? Like a planning power hour. And so this is 1 hour that you're going to dedicate to planning out your next week, or maybe in some cases 2 weeks. And the way you do it is you start off with what's called a mental download, okay? Raise your hand if you can relate to this. You have so much to do, and it's all on your mind, and it's overwhelming because it's all on your mind. Can anyone relate to that? Yeah. Well, guess what a mental download is? You download it onto paper, all right? And when I do a mental download, for a brief moment, there's usually this like sigh of relief because I'm like, oh, okay, I don't have to remember everything that I need to do anymore because it's on paper. And now sometimes there's a lot on that piece of paper, and that kind of makes my eyes go wide a little bit, but a lot of times it just feels really good to get it all down. And so when you're doing a mental download, and really your entire power hour, you should eliminate all distraction, okay? So turn the phone off or flip it over. You shouldn't be like checking your social media during this time. Your computer shouldn't be open unless you like need it to, maybe you do your calendar on your computer. I think a lot of people probably do that nowadays, but you really want to eliminate distractions. Don't do this in like the living room of your apartment where your roommates are walking in and out. Do this in your room, shut the door, and seclude yourself for 1 hour a week to do this mental download. The next step is to prioritize what's on that mental download, all right? So as much as we'd like to think that we can always get everything done, that's just not the reality of it, all right? And the reality of it is, too, that a lot of stuff that we put on our mental download, it also doesn't need to be done, right? And so what you need to do is you've got to prioritize what is urgent, what is important, and what could be like pushed off later, all right? So I put a 1 next to anything that is urgent and important, all right? Anything that's urgent and important. So if it's Sunday and you have a paper due on Tuesday, I would say that's a 1. That's an urgent and an important, right? If you have an assignment due the next morning, that's an urgent and an important. If you have to do something and prepare something to take to a club meeting, that's probably urgent and important, right? So a 1 is something that's important and it needs to be done like right now, okay? Don't confuse that with urgent and not important, okay? So if you like haven't responded to the 15 text messages that have come through that day, that seems urgent because those text message notifications are there, and that little bubble that some of you guys hate because it says 15 and it has to be cleared out. You can't have the little text bubble, right? That's urgent, but it's not important, okay? So that could be pushed off till later. The number 2s, all right, are important but not urgent, okay? So if there's a paper that's due a week from now or a week and a half from now, that's important, but it's not quite urgent yet, so it doesn't have to be put in the schedule right then and there. Okay? It doesn't need to be put in immediately. And then the 3s are not as important, not as urgent. Okay, so something like laundry, all right, unless you've like completely run out of all clothes, probably not like the most urgent and important thing, okay? You could fit that in a little bit later if you really had to. While you're at college, like, calling mom. Now, I'm not saying mom's not important, and you should definitely call mom and make time, but it doesn't need to take up, like, tons of time in your planner. Like, call her on your walk to class one day. You can multitask, walk and talk at the same time. So 3 are not important, not urgent, things that don't really need to be in the schedule. And sometimes there's things that you put on your mental download and you're like, I really don't need to do this at all, and you can just cross them off the list. So the second part is prioritizing. And I think that's where a lot of people fall short, is they make a gigantic to-do list, but then they don't actually prioritize, and then they just start crossing things off, but they're not always getting to the stuff that actually needs to get done because there's so much other noise on that to-do list that's distracting them, right? Once you've prioritized, now you need to fit in all your stuff. So in your planner, I'm a pen and pencil type of person, so I like have a physical planner. If you do this on Google Calendar or iCal or whatever the case is, you put your stuff in. You start with your big rocks, you move to your little rocks, your sand, your water, so on and so forth, okay? Let me see. Cool. Another tip, too, so this is specifically for, like, school. So when I was new at time management, one of the things that one of the mistakes I would make is I just put study in my planner, all right? So I block off, like, 3 or 4 hours or whatever it was, or 1 hour, sometimes 2 hours for study/homework, okay? And one of the biggest tips that I'll give you for students is don't just write study, but instead write down what you're intending to accomplish during that time, okay? So if you have 2 hours in between classes and you're going to use that for homework, put what homework you actually want to do in there, all right? So I would put like problems 1 through 3 for like my engineering homework or something, or read chapter 17 in this textbook. And I would set an objective for my study time. And the reason you want to do that is because you could go sit in the library for 4 hours to like study and actually not get anything done. Have you guys ever done that before? Some of you guys are just getting started with college, you haven't quite gotten there yet. But it's like you actually did one problem in 4 hours, or you read like a page of a chapter. And so you can technically say that you did homework and that you studied because you did accomplish something, but you actually wasted 3.5 hours of that 4, right? And so when you set clear objectives for your study time, what happens is you're more intentional about it and you'll actually get stuff done. So that's, Connor used the example of Sebastian. So Seabass this summer, most of you guys probably know him. He was taking 2 summer classes. If you've ever taken a summer class, you know they're extremely accelerated. He was my sales manager, so this was like in the middle of SC2. He was taking 2 of them at the same time, so I was like, I needed him. And he also wanted to be selling and leading the team by example and stuff like that. And so what I did was I mapped out his schedule for like 5 weeks in a row, and I sat down with the syllabus from each class, and I put his office stuff in, which were his big rocks at the time, and I looked at what assignments were due when, and it's almost kind of like a puzzle in some cases, but I didn't just put in his schedule, okay, Sebastian, study here. I said, you've got 6 hours to study this day. You need to do homework 1 for accounting and the case study for BIT, and you need to read chapter 2 because you have an exam or a quiz due at the end of the week, right? And so I put together like exactly what he needed to get done in each of the days or the times that he had to study. So he had clear objectives and he was intentional about it. And that's really what helped him navigate it so well, is it was just planned out ahead of time. He already knew what he was going to have to do. So when he sat down to actually study, he didn't have to figure out like, oh, well, what do I do? What's the most urgent thing? What's due next? Like, it was already just planned out ahead of time. And I'll kind of show you guys a little bit of that here next. All right. So here's an example of what my schedule looked like when I was in college. You're probably not going to be able to see it too well. But I put everything in the monthly calendar first, and then I do week by week. So I had a trip. This was like the equivalent of Bahamas that year. I have homework due. We have a divisional prep. So what we're doing here, I had an exam, homework, an exam. This week sucked. I had 3 exams and a project due. Olean push starting. Like, I have all my big calendar things here. And then on a week-to-week basis, it looks like this.
Bang.
And I also ran the pilot this year when I think this was my senior year, maybe. So my schedule is like wild, and I don't expect that most of you are running like a 3-day training seminar during school. But I had all my classes in, I put lunch in, and I had demos because this was the only in push, so I was doing appointments during this time too. I didn't do that every week. I had let's see, lunch again. Let's see, I did problems 1 through 3 here. I worked on 2 pages of a Spanish paper here. I edited my Spanish paper. So instead of just writing homework, I wrote what I was going to do during that time, right? And I had some other stuff in here, like friend's birthday was here. Went shopping for my friend's birthday with her and another friend, and like had some meetings. I have exercise in here too. And my schedule in college was like pretty crazy. And I honestly look back and I don't know how I did it. This talk is how I did it, but sometimes when you look at this, it kind of seems overwhelming in a sense. And I know one of the first things that I thought when I was initially starting to do time management is I kind of thought, well, I don't know if I want every minute of every day planned out for me. And it almost felt like I wouldn't have as much time for spontaneity and just like stuff that would randomly come up. But what I found as I did it more and more and I got better at it is that because I was planning out my time and I was more efficient with it, I actually opened up more free time for myself. And so that way, if someone was like, hey, do you want to go do this? I was like, yeah, right? Or because I was more on top of my homework and I wasn't procrastinating and I didn't fall behind, if there was a time where instead of doing homework with my friends, we sat in our living room and had a heart-to-heart for like 4 hours until 2 o'clock in the morning and I didn't get homework done, it didn't feel like that stressful because I was on top of my stuff already. Does that make sense? And so when you're planning, it doesn't mean that you can't be spontaneous and it doesn't mean that you can't have fun. It actually just opens up more time for you to do this. And that's fun too. The other thing that sometimes I fell victim to in college when I was really busy was I didn't always make the time to plan. And if you're thinking to yourself, oh, I don't have an hour to plan, you do, okay? That's like a really weak excuse. One of the hours that you spend scrolling through Instagram or watching Netflix, just plan during that time, and you'll be good to go, all right? And as far as the third key to time management, and then I'll give you guys some action steps here before we wrap up and get lunch, is to stick to the plan. So
Boom.
that's the hard part for most people, all right? It's easy to do the planning when you get good at it, but you've actually got to stick to the plan. Doing that power hour and making time, it's not really going to do too much for you if you don't actually stick to it. And obviously nobody's perfect. One of the things that I think is important too is don't beat yourself up if you messed something up or you didn't plan properly or you missed something that was in your plan. Like, don't beat yourself up about it, but get in the habit of sticking to the appointments you make for yourself and don't let yourself down. So going to give you guys a few action steps leaving here to start doing this immediately, and then we'll adjourn. So first one is if you don't have one already, get your planner, all right? And the second thing is put the next power hour in your schedule, okay? So what I encourage you to do is during lunch, actually just take like 2 seconds while you're eating or after you eat or while the line's long, do it before you get in line, and just put your next power hour in your schedule, okay? So it could be after today once you get home before you go do whatever with friends. It could be tomorrow morning when you wake up or tomorrow afternoon when you wake up, whatever. Put it in your schedule. And right now it's the beginning of the semester, so the next thing that I want you guys to do is I want you to map out all of this stuff that's due for the entire semester, okay? So you saw in my, the one that had my, like the month on it, I had all my exams and homework assignments when they were due in there. Look at your entire semester now, because if you put it all in now, nothing will sneak up on you, all right? Don't just look at the month of September, because if you look at September and then you have an exam on October 2nd, you won't know until October 1st when you plan October. Does that make sense? Look at the entire semester now. Nothing will sneak up on you, and it'll make you feel really good. So just take the syllabus for each of your classes and go through one after the next and write it all in the schedule in the monthly part. All right. You also, of course, want to protect your planning time. All right. So the most important appointment you keep each week is the one with yourself, and that's your power hour. The next thing that I actually flipped those on my screen here, but the next one is to be aware of how you spend your time, all right? Colin was doing this with some of the people, or like our managers at SC2. So if you didn't know, or maybe you've just pretended to not know, there's this thing on your iPhones. I don't know about Androids, for those of you guys who have those, but it'll tell you your screen time, like how you're using your screen time, all right? And that might be a good wake-up call for some of you guys, all right? So I encourage you to look at that and just be aware of how you're spending your time. They say if you're aware, you've got a shot. And see if there's anything you can cut. You know, if you're feeling busy or overwhelmed or stressed, see if there's anything you can cut that might make more time for you, okay? If you can start doing these things, create the habit of time management, this will really, really help you out. And hopefully, hope you guys have a really, really fantastic semester. So wishing you guys all a great time planning in your next Power Hour and really productive semester. So I'll bring Connor back up.